Howdy y'all, it's Angela, and today's issue is white guilt, white privilege, whatever you want to call them, or it's neither are philosophies I subscribe to. I simply don't. I want to read a few names to you. I want to read a list to you, okay? Native Americans, Irish, Jews, Italians, Polish, Puerto Rican, Mexican, Chinese, Japanese, war vets, cops, teachers, nurses, Mormons, Catholics, disabled people, LGBTQ, inner city whites, suburban blacks. Where does it end? Where does it end? You can slice us, dice us, chop us, slap us up, flip us, rub us down. No matter what segment of society you personally associate with, whether by genetics, by choice, by whatever, it doesn't matter. Whatever you personally associate with, there hasn't been some level, there isn't some group that hasn't experienced some level of persecution. It's actually kind of what sort of solidifies belief systems, is it not? I wasn't raised to see people by the color of their skin. Shock here. I'm going to tell you the truth. I grew up for the longest time, perhaps naively, perhaps privileged, I suppose, but I don't subscribe to that. I grew up naively believing that racism in my country didn't exist. And before you freak out, you got to remember when I grew up. I was born in 1973. It wasn't that long after Martin Luther King died. My grandparents were hardcore Irish Catholic Democrats, Kennedy through and through. I was raised to not judge a book by its cover. I was raised to judge a person by the content of the character, not the color of their skin. And that extended to their religion, that extended to any number of, demographic markers. That's not how I saw people. And I thought I was doing what was, I'm not even going to say I thought anything about it until I experienced people who were racist. Not me personally, but until I actually saw racism firsthand, which was well into my early 20s. I didn't see it. And it wasn't that I was somebody who was completely sheltered. I spent every summer in Florida. I went to school in Boston. I was in the foster care system. But I was also in New Hampshire, which is about 99% white in the 70s and 80s. It's about 98% now. But I wasn't uncomfortable with black people. I watch television, and you can say that, white people only appreciate black entertainers, which is kind of absurd to me because everybody I saw in the 80s was in the entertainment business. It was the MTV generation. It was the Inquirer. I saw black people like Oprah beating Donahue. I saw The Cosby Show being more popular than Who's the Boss. I saw people advancing. Everybody I saw, by the way, in the media at large was a celebrity. That's just how it was. And the only business person I could really name at the time, I'm going to say, was maybe Lee Iacocca, and I don't really think I even understood who that was. I just kind of liked the name, Lee Iacocca. Kind of rolls, doesn't it? And Donald Trump, because as anybody who lived through the 80s will remember, Donald Trump was a fixture everywhere. It's just, that was part of his branding, which, again, I can appreciate. But black people were no different to me than white people. Also, how was I to look at Cosby kids, for example, or kids, Hollywood actors whose parents, were, kids of Hollywood actors, whose parents were wealthy and privileged. I saw Will Smith making his way up, I saw strides being made. In the 90s, I saw Clarence Thomas become Supreme Court Justice. In the 80s, I saw Sandra Day O'Connor. I did not think these biases that are being pounded upon my child existed in my childhood. Whether you can hate me, love me, whatever, you can agree, disagree, it doesn't matter. Because to me, what I remember being told was racism was apartheid in South Africa. I remember starvation in Africa. I remember hearing about poor people in the Middle East and women, I remember the first time I ever heard about female genital mutilation. I cried. I cried. What a horrible thing. I did not grow up believing that black people were less than. I did not believe that black people were the only poor people. How could I? Half my family was on welfare. Half my family still is on welfare. My family dealt drugs. They hung out with Hell's Angels proudly. Still do. Still deal drugs. My aunt has come to me in the past and asked me for my various medications so she could sell them. I have other aunts who were arrested for food stamp fraud. I have aunts who stole their children's disability checks because we have the hereditary angioedema. I don't come from a family of winners per se. I have extended family that are very successful, very prominent, very reputable people. I personally, unfortunately, that's not the majority of my immediate or my close association of family. When I say immediate family, because my mom was so young, and my grandmother was only 37 when I was born. My grandfather was 41. Because my mom was so young, I was raised around a lot of my aunts and uncles. My cousins, actually, a lot of them think I'm their aunt, call me aunt. They get confused because of the age difference. I'm only 9 years younger than my youngest aunt Tammy. On my dad's side, I have aunts and uncles that are actually younger than me, substantially younger than me. Because again, you got to remember how young my parents were. So anyway, where is the privilege for somebody like me? I'm just looking through the list. I made a little list for myself of some of the background. By the way, I want to bring this up. When I talk about being in the foster care system and having an abusive mother and not understanding a lot of things and about having hereditary angioedema, I want everybody to understand I don't say that because I'm a victim. In fact, quite the opposite. I want to say that because I don't represent some Molly Ringwald, John Hughes version of the American lifestyle. I didn't grow up in that. I watched 16 Candles and wished my family was that dysfunctional. They forgot her birthday. Wow, at least, anyway. I grew up thinking I wasn't liked. The first thing I remember my mother was saying to me was, "You're a liar." I was about 2. I remember it very clearly. So to me, a privilege would have been growing up feeling that my mother had my back, that anybody had my back. A privilege would have been growing up in a non-drug addicted, dysfunctional, brutal, violent, narcissistic, malignant household. My privilege would have been not having angioedema and the pain that caused, and having my mother steal my pain meds from as far back as I could remember. Or throwing up and begging Jesus Christ for death when I was in 7th grade. I remember laying on the floor begging God to please kill me because I could not handle my pain anymore. And my father screamed in from their bedroom and said, "Angela, shut up." So I don't want to talk about white privilege. It's what you do with your life. And to that end, I want to talk about my country and the contributions that my people, my family, my ancestors gave to this country. I want to talk about my Revolutionary War ancestor, who, I won't read the whole thing, but I gotta find it, I'm so sorry. Okay, so I want to sorry about that. I'm back. So talking about my ancestors and why I won't take a knee to this flag, and quite frankly, it's really a shame because even if, I hear that this country was built on the back of slaves, even more reason that you should take your stand for your ancestors under that flag because they helped build this country, whether they did it through slavery, whether they did it as free men, whatever the case may be, they still contributed to the building of this nation. Don't you understand? And what do they want? They want to be part of the freedom of this nation. And Abraham Lincoln and many people in the North, they were drafted, which I'll get into in a minute, but many people were hardcore abolitionists, and they gave their lives for something they desperately believed in: the freedom of man, the freedom of all men being created equal. And don't make the mistake, but when you see the 5/8 rule in the Constitution, they were not saying that African American, or they were not saying that African slaves were less than. Yes, they were, but that's not exactly what that was. That was punting. I'm not going to deny it. They had to get a nation together, and they punted on slavery in order to form the Union. They did the 5/8 because they did not want to give, the North did not want to give the South the numbers for the Electoral College, because they did not want the people who were enslaved in chains to be taken as citizens but not given the right to vote. Didn't they just go to war for that? So they would not have allowed the black people to vote, but they would have counted them as citizens, and the white people still would have controlled everything. So they couldn't make them full citizens, because then they would have been on for the Electoral College. They would have been counted in the numbers for the Electoral College. But they didn't want to make them property. They weren't ducks and cows or chairs or wagons. They were human beings. So making them 5/8 means they were more than half a human being. And I know that sounds harsh by today's standards, but the notion that you can judge the past by today is a red herring. That's meant to make you feel guilty. You cannot do it. And you cannot discount their efforts to push humanity forward, because without them, we wouldn't be where we are today. We wouldn't have had the Martin Luther King studying the words of the founders. We wouldn't have had the Frederick Douglasses studying the words of the founders and taking it to Lincoln and challenging Lincoln. We would not have had Martin Luther King studying the words of Frederick Douglass and so many others, and then taking those words to Johnson and Kennedy. Think about what you're saying. When you say it should have been this way just because you think so today, how very arrogant and ignorant. How very arrogant. How dare you sit there and talk and yell at old women in the street, or not even old women, the woman in New York City who stood outside and defended Teddy Roosevelt, and she said, "Is that all you got?" And he said, "You don't understand." How dare you? Just because somebody doesn't agree with you doesn't mean they don't understand you. And because you can't see anything else but your own perspective, isn't it you who doesn't understand the rest of us? Think about it. Now, I wanted to get into this real quick. This is from my ancestor. I don't even know how far back. He's Thomas Fornash. He's the namesake of my grandfather as well, but that's not me saying a lot, because there's tons of Toms, Johns, whatever back in the day. But he was conscripted into the military. He was from, by the way, Covington County, Kentucky. Covington. He was conscripted into the military. He served. He went over. He was in Virginia at the time. He died in Kentucky. That's what that's from. He joined the army in Richmond, Virginia, and marched down to a place called Cabin Point, where he lay a considerable time. This is cool. He then marched to to Petersburg, Virginia, whence he returned to Richmond, where he remained watching the movements of Arnold the Traitor, there committing great ravages in Virginia until sometime in December, when his term of service having expired, he received his discharge and went home a few days before Christmas. Again, May 1781, he was drafted from the county of Orange in the state of Virginia for 3 months, and he served for a short time under George Waugh. I'll skip ahead a little bit because this is really cool. Where he lay for a short time. He then, in consequence of a deficit of regular artillerists, volunteered to serve under command of Captain Whitehead Coleman of the United States Light Artillery. He marched from Richmond and was joined by General Wayne at or near a place then known by the name of Raccoon Ford and the Rappahannock River. The army, and if I screwed that up, I apologize. The army then, under the command of the Marquis de Lafayette. It's Lafayette. Don't you get how cool this is? He marched back to Richmond. The British moved off. He proceeded towards Old Jamestown, where General Wayne gave them battle. He then marched to a place called Stubborn Hills and remained there until his term of service expired, when he received his discharge and returned home. He remained in Virginia until the spring of 1792, when he moved to Kentucky and has resided there ever since. And it goes on, and he got his pension from Congress, from the Congress Act for the veterans of the Revolutionary War. That's my history. That's so many of your history. I'm not going to take a knee to what that man gave and the people that he served with. And he watched Arnold the Traitor, and he served under Lafayette. Think about how cool this is. So that's one piece of it. And then I have this other one who I have to read this to you. I'll paraphrase a little bit, but it seems I have an ancestor, Charles Fornash. States that in the winter and spring of 1857, he was living in Pendleton County on the waters of Grassy Creek. He then lived on the lands of Louis Meyer. The defendants came upon his premise with a force of arms and drove him from his house, the plaintiffs, down to the terror of his family, and turned his family out to the inclement weather and destroying and breaking up a great amount of his furniture and other damage to the property of this. The plaintiff, he further states that he got his neighbors together to rebuild it. By the way, this is actually how it was written in court. That he got his neighbors together to rebuild the house. The defendants returned, and after taking him from his house with force of arms, they then drove his wife and children out in the cold. They threw his property out of his house, breaking and damaging it greatly, and then they threw down his house and set fire to the same and burned it up, whereby he has been greatly damaged, and prays for judgment for $1,000 and other and all proper relief. And then he's got a bunch of witnesses. I don't know what this guy did to people. Again, sorry about that. I got interrupted. Phone call came in. So, anyways, as I was saying about my Civil War ancestor, he fought on the side of the Union, and he was almost immediately captured by the South and held in stockade, and then he was released, and then his term expired, and he was drafted again. He came back, and then he actually went AWOL from February to November. So I'm guessing he actually went to deal with the farm, and which brings me to my final point. This is my grandma. She's a first generation, 100% Irish, transplant, I suppose. My great-grandfather, her father, excuse me, sorry, I'm all over the place. My great-grandfather, her father, has a hangar named after him in Pensacola at the Air Force Base. Let's see, his name was Joseph O'Brien. Chief Joseph O'Brien faced an understaffed, undertrained, and inadequately equipped fire department. He immediately procured new equipment and hired new personnel to have the capacity to meet the task at hand. He assumed responsibility for both air station structural fire protection and aircraft crash and rescue operations. He initiated an intensive training program, raised the skills and knowledge levels of the entire department, and with innovative ideas, greatly increased or decreased the fire department's response time to aircraft mishaps. After closing the Barron Airfield, B-A-R-I-N for those in Pensacola, field in 1958, Fire Chief O'Brien assumed the same position at the naval base in Newport, Rhode Island. He served with great distinction and maintained high goals and achievement he displayed at Barron Field. It is appropriate that this building be dedicated to the memory of one who not only served Barron Field so well and loyally, but also served us all by his long and distinguished career for his country and the naval service. So that's my great-grandfather. He was not, obviously in the military, but he served. He did his part. So that's that side of the family. My father, who was a hippie, by the way, this is my dad. This is how I grew up. This is the man that I grew up with as my father. He was in bands. He woke us up Saturday morning playing guitar at 7:30 in the morning. That was my dad. My dad was in the military. You serve your country. Remember what Kennedy said? Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. What happened to that? And what happened to never forget? Those police officers and firefighters in New York City who on 9/11 so bravely and insanely just ran into burning buildings to save lives. What happened to never forget? And now you people vilify them? Come on. Come on. Look at Hong Kong right now. How many thousands of people are going to be disappeared because they won't be re-educated? How many of them are going to be forced organ donation? How many of them will never be heard from again in any sense? Their families will never know what happened to them. So I don't want to hear how this country has oppressed you. Get your heads right, people. We're not victims. We are what we make of ourselves because we're United States citizens, and y'all need to freaking remember that. Whether your family was slaves and they contributed to the growth of this nation, whether they were generals, whether they were poor dirt farmers like my family. So whether they were poor dirt farmers like mine, can you see this picture right here? That's my grandfather's father, so my great-great-grandfather. He didn't even have shoes on. They were the epitome of dirt poor farmers. They were dirt farmers. On the other side of my family, there's more prestige, but it doesn't matter. We are what we put into life. We are not our biggest mistake or our greatest shortcoming. We are the body of our life's work, and I hope you all remember that. That's all. So, one last thing, this is a housekeeping thing. If anybody can be a video editor, I can't pay a lot, but I am willing. So, DM me or find me on Parler, just at Mother Issues on Parler. Thanks, guys. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and stick around, because I've got a lot more to say. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon. Bye.